美国政治风险调查公司欧亚集团 Eurasia Group 在1月6日发布了他们集团的年度报告。在这份2025年全球10大风险的预测报告里，全球领导真空的机灵世界位居这份风险报告的榜首，反映了当前世界各国正在经历的考验。那些参与 G7、G8 引领世界的国家，在去年如法国、德国执政党面临国内路线之争的严峻考验，如南韩尹锡悦荒腔走板的政治操作。如今年才刚开始，加拿大总理就宣布要辞职走人。许多国家都有自己内部的问题需要解决，在自顾不暇的困窘下，凸显了全球领导力的缺失已经严重到危机的级别。其中，川普更是成为10大风险里显性或隐性的关键。
A leading U.S. consulting firm has warned that 2025 will be the most geopolitically dangerous year since the Cold War. The group says the top risk is the arrival of the so-called G0 world, where people face heightened geopolitical instability due to a lack of global leadership.
Between the inauguration of Donald Trump, uncertainty in the Middle East, Ukraine and the South China Sea, and major political changes coming to South Korea and Canada, 2025 is set to be another dynamic year on the world stage. The Eurasia Group on Monday released its annual look at the top political risks of 2025. They include concerns about artificial intelligence, global trade, Iran, Russia, and what a second Trump administration could mean for world order.
I think very fraught period, in global politics, where you have Donald Trump returning, somebody who famously is not interested in multilateralism. That moment meeting this one that we're in now, in which these institutions are being forced to change.
But a world where even the United States, and this is the unique historical circumstance we find ourselves in, the United States built the rules of the road for post-war global order, and they are now the country that's leading its dismantling. So that's a pretty unique historical circumstance. We think at Eurasia Group that things have not been this geopolitically fragile since at least the 1930s, maybe even the 1890s. It's a very difficult time.
I mean, Trump is not the driver of risk. He's a symptom of the fact that the United States is no longer interested, is not willing to be the world's policeman or the architect of global free trade or even the promoter of common democratic values and rule of law.
It's a return to the law of the jungle, where the powerful do what they will and the weak do what they must, and no one's really protecting them. And a G0 world is very aligned with also an America First world. I mean, the United States is very powerful. You look at its allies right now, and so many of those governments are in disarray. You saw what happened with Trudeau, of course, South Korea, Germany, France. They're all playing defense. They're all saying, look, just don't talk about me. Just don't tweet about me, whatever you do.
毫无悬念的，2025年绝大多数的风险都是来自于川普，因为全球集体所面临的危机感与不确定性，全都系在这位即将走马上任的美国总统身上。而且，就算他还没有上任，他扰动世界的本事已经是全球认证了。
Okay, I want you to pay attention to this one. In the span of just a few weeks, Donald Trump has floated the annexation of Canada, the takeover of the Panama Canal, and a military invasion of Mexico. And now he is turning up the heat on Greenland by threatening to hit its parent country, Denmark, with tariffs, even refusing to rule out taking the territory over by military force. Watch this.
Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? Are you going to negotiate a new treaty? Are you going to ask the Canadians to hold a vote? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift.
He repeated his threat to put crippling tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico if they don't tighten border security. And he announced a unilateral plan to completely rename the Gulf of Mexico.
We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name.
Donald Trump has often been critical of NATO and used this platform to urge European countries to pay their bills, increase their military spending as a percentage of GDP.
I think NATO should have 5%, yeah. Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%. I think they should be, they're in dangerous territory. I think it should be, they can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%.
But with war raging in Gaza, a fragile peace in Lebanon and instability in Syria, his remarks on the Middle East will cause real alarm.
If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is.
川普在竞选期间多次把关税视为是他要带领美国再次伟大的工具之一，而许多经济学者则担忧，川普如果下手太重，恐将掀起全球贸易战，届时钳制他国的利器会不会成为反噬美国的力量？但不管美国媒体有多少的担忧，这位美国总统很早就表态，征收关税势在必行，只是会以多大的规模跟形式展开。
Some new reporting this hour from the Washington Post. It says that aides to President-elect Trump are exploring tariff plans that would be applied to every country, but only cover critical imports, certain sectors. So, Mike, let's talk through all of this, starting with what we're hearing from the Washington Post this morning. Still a lot of questions, still a lot of ambiguity about how tariffs would work, but it was a key part of incoming president's plans as he was laying them out to the American people. He has promised to follow through with this, and I guess just the idea that they are still talking about this with 2 weeks to go raises the idea that, yeah, these are going to be real, but maybe it won't be as broad as had been anticipated before.
Becky, that's exactly right. In this reporting from the Washington Post, Jeff Stein, who is the very best on this issue, this is a narrowing of what President-elect Trump had said he was going to do. So, of course, during the campaign, he talked about 10 to 20% tariffs on everything that's coming into the United States. But reality bites.
And speaking of Trump, he is set to take office in just under 2 weeks. And you and your team have put his return as the second biggest risk of 2025. What about his presidency is so risky?
Well, it's not that he's going to fail. It's more that he has consolidated so much more power this time around than in 2017, both compared to his allies and his adversaries. The Chinese economy is in real trouble. Russia's in serious decline. Iran is falling apart right now. They've lost their empire in the Middle East. But also the fact that the GOP is now riding Trump's coattails, not the other way around. All of the people around him are directly loyal to Trump. So if you've got a problem with what Trump is saying, you don't get to go to the Secretary of State or go to the head of the USTR and say, hey, let's work this out. It's Trump way.
So you're saying it's less about him failing and more about him succeeding in his agendas?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the tariffs he says he's going to put on, I think he's going to put them on. Washington Post had this leak yesterday morning saying, oh, they're not going to be that tough. He immediately posted over the top and said, no, I'm going to go ahead with what I said. He's going to take 1 million, illegals out of the United States, deport them in the first year. You should take that as a serious policy that is going to come. And the impact of that on inflation in the United States, for example, on, consumption in the United States, those things are real.
目前看来，川普暂时无意把关税拉到贸易战的形式，毕竟把所有人都逼上悬崖，对美国的经济现状是毫无注意的。但如何巩固美国在经济领域里的霸主地位，仍然被川普视为是重要目标。就像欧亚集团的总裁 Ian Bremmer 接受访问时说的，他认为川普只是想制定有利于美国的规则，他会去跟所有的领导人交涉。如果有必要的话，他会对这些国家征收关税，以达到他想要的目的。Bremer 认为，在当今的环境下，川普也许会取得一些胜利， 但从全球角度来看，还是会影响整体发展的。
I mean, there's a couple of things I think that are important to note here. Look, Donald Trump will be the president of the United States in 13 days' time. That makes anything he says news. Anything he says is important. It's also worth saying, I think, that one of the things we know from his first term and indeed the years after that is that sometimes there is some posturing. Sometimes you might even describe that as sort of negotiation out loud, megaphone diplomacy, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't come to anything. Sometimes it does come to something. So I think the context is important, but we cannot be sure, I don't think, how serious he is about some of these things. He's clearly serious about things like NATO, because that's been very consistent, and he did get some concessions from NATO over the years.
That is very interesting, and the antithesis of President Carter. He made the decision to give back the Panama Canal because it was costing the United States a lot, and it was controversial. It was not an inexpensive entity to maintain, and it belonged to Canada. So suggesting that it would be taken back or suggesting that force would be used would bring all of that back. And while taking him seriously, many American presidents, as well as diplomats, leaders around the world, understand that what you personally want or want to have happen does not necessarily happen. It doesn't matter just because the president of the United States.
Except that he negotiates in a zero-sum fashion, and what he's talking about is using economic force. He's talking about significant tariffs on Denmark, significant tariffs, economic force in dealing with an ally like Canada. That is very different to the incumbent of the Oval Office talking about what he would like.
That's true, but we also know that what he has said today may be 180 degrees different than what he says tomorrow. And he's not yet president. Once he gets back in the office, gets the full briefings, presumably it'll be tempered, but he's not consistent. No one will accuse him of that. And he's not yet president. So we will listen and we will see what he does when he gets into office.
Europe will remain an open market and will not become a closed one. There's no gain in a trade war. However, Europe cannot be the only continent open to global overcapacity. Across the globe, markets are increasingly protective, with state aid marking our industries uncompetitive. This must be addressed. I still hope to convince the next U.S. administration that we have everything to lose from a collective trade war. Europe is an economic power with 450 million consumers and must be viewed as such. Our goal, our responsibility, is to be united as 27 nations to be able to negotiate.
Probe.